everyone, it's me, Katie, and I am at the Riverbend Preserve. It's part of the Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation Commission, and they take care of it. And we're gonna meet one of our friends who's also named Katie. She works here, and she's one of the people that takes care of this land. And we're actually gonna talk about one of the specific ways they take care of the land here using fire. Come on, let's go. We are here at Riverbend Preserve. We're in the southwest corner of Washtenaw County along the River Raisin, and this area used to be an old farm field. Since it was acquired by Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation, we have allowed it to fill in with grasses and some shrubs and trees. Since then though, the shrubs, which are not native to this community, have become very dense in areas. It doesn't provide good habitat for birds or butterflies, other pollinators. And so one of the goals of land managers is to keep it in balance. So some open areas that are great for grassland nesting birds, ground nesting bees, butterflies, turtles. And so there are a few different ways we can do that. And today we're talking about my favorite, which is fire. It may sound kind of scary, but the way that we do it through controlled burning is in a very safe and controlled manner that really improves the ecosystem for native plants and animals.
Hey Katie, what is this tree and why is it still here?
This is a white oak. White oaks are native to this region, and fun fact, they are fire adapted. That means that if we were to light this landscape on fire, these oak trees will be left standing and healthy and happy afterwards. A lot of times fire will remove any leaves that are still on the ground from the soil, and then the acorns can drop and be in closer contact with the soil. When we talk about fire adapted landscapes, a lot of people think of historically large fires moving through the area from things such as lightning strikes. And while that might be true out west, here fire was used historically by the communities that lived here before Europeans settled the area. And those are our indigenous communities like the Anishinaabe or the Potawatomi. And they used fire for so many reasons. They could light fire to the landscape to flush out game for hunting. They could clear areas for their communities to settle in. And one really cool adaptation is they would burn a landscape, for instance, if there was sassafras. And sassafras had a lot of medicinal purposes in its roots. And so they would burn it, and then the sassafras would just come back with vigor, and then they could harvest it for those medicinal purposes.
So in Michigan, there's a lot of different native communities or ecosystems that rely on fire to remain. And one of those, well, we'll talk about a couple of them, but there's things like oak woodlands, savannas, prairies, and even some wetland areas that rely on fire to keep the species of plants there that need to be there. And the reason that's important is because there's all kinds of different animals that live in those habitats that don't live anywhere else. So one example of this is a fen or a wetland. A fen is a type of wetland, and there's a really special animal that lives in these ecosystems, and that's called the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. Now, this is the only venomous snake in Michigan, and it's pretty rare. It's actually on it's actually a threatened species in Michigan. So they rely on these wetland habitats to survive. And the reason that is because the food that they eat, which is voles, mice, other small mammals, they live in the prairie fen vegetation, so all those special plants that rely on fire. So if you think about the food chain, the plants are at the bottom, the small mammals are above that because they eat those plants and rely on them for habitat, and then the Massasauga rattlesnake is on top because it's eating those small mammals. So without fire in a fen, those plants might get out-competed by shrubs that start to come from forest areas nearby. Those shrubs might be native or they might be invasive, but they can cause problems in wetland areas because it shades out those plants that the small mammals live in and that the Massasauga rattlesnake survives in. So fire can be very, very important in a lot of different landscapes, and we're going to check out another different kind soon.
So when we talk about these landscapes and all of the special animals that live in it, you might start thinking, how does fire not hurt these animals? It seems like it can be really destructive. And that's something as land managers we definitely take into account when we are planning our burn season. Here at Riverbend Preserve, we would only burn about 1/3 of the land at a time, and the fire's not going to carry through all of these shrubs. So both of those things provide what we call refugia for the animals, for the insects, for the little snakes, so that when we burn, and we burn pretty slowly too, so it's going to kind of creep through this landscape, and then those little pockets of cold space or the outlying unburned areas will provide places that the little critters and the animals can go to be safe.
So we're back at the river, and there's a lot of really cool animals that live and rely on our river to survive, but some of those animals need outside of the river to grow or to lay their nests. One of those animals is a turtle, and there's all kinds of different species of turtles that live in the river Raisin, like the painted turtle, map turtle, snapping turtle, just to name a few. But turtles, when it's time for them to nest, they need high ground, and the reason that is so the nests don't get flooded with water. Those eggs need to breathe, and if they're underwater, they will die. So when it's time for the female turtles to nest, they come up from the water up to high ground, and voila, they lay their eggs. And we actually are here at Riverbend, and there is an old turtle nest right here. And if you want to come closer, you can see leftover eggshells from a turtle. And this is what they look like. Turtle eggs are rubbery, so they're not hard like a chicken egg. And that's so that when the mother lays her eggs and they drop into the nest, which is dug underground, that they don't break. So turtles need to have kind of a clear path to get up from the water down here up to a high area to lay their eggs. And prescribed burning really helps them with that path all the way up and all the way back.
Riverbend Preserve is still in early stages of restoration. And what that means is that we still have a lot of invasive species that are dominating the landscape. And when I say invasive species, I'm referring to plants like this honeysuckle here. These invasive shrubs and other invasive plants were brought to the region from areas in Asia and Europe with similar climates. Where they're native, they also have predators that keep them in check. But here in this region, they do not. So they just grow profusely. And fire is one way that we can knock them back. A couple other of these invasive plants are the spotted knapweed. This purple flower blooms usually in August, but still a couple hanging on. You can see that all throughout this landscape are spotted knapweed plants. Another one is mullein. Which is identifiable by these small leaves here, or the stalks that can get up to 6 feet tall. Because Riverbend Preserve is in the early stages of management, we've only done a couple things so far to try and help it along the way. Back in November 2018, we came back with a tractor with a giant brush hog or a giant mower attached to it, and we mowed down a lot of these areas. You can see the dense shrub wall was as far as the mower got up to. And so that took out a lot of the shrubs. And then we came back with volunteers this summer and pulled some of the spotted knapweed. One of our crew members has also put down some native seed that we're trying to get established. and then we can come through with fire to kind of bring it all together. So that will be the next stage, and this is a great example of a before shot. In a little bit we'll go to an after, and you can see someplace that we've burned over the last couple years. Before we change sites, it's really important that we make sure we're not taking invasive species with us, and they may travel in the form of seeds attached to our pants. So it's good to pick off all the seeds from your clothes before you leave, or scrape the dirt from your boots so that you're not taking the seeds that are in the soil with you to other ecosystems. So we've moved on to the Riverbend Preserve. This is a special place because it was burned over the last couple years. The area that we're standing in right now was burned in spring of 2018, and then over closer to the woods was burned spring 2019. And so now I want to show off some of the native plants that we see here post-burn. This one here is called Big Blue Stem. It's kind of hard to see right here, but it sometimes resembles like a turkey foot, the shape of the grass itself. And then another one is Indian grass. That's this one here. And then, kind of hard to tell because it's not flowering right now, but this is coneflower. And it's important to point out the things that are no longer flowering because it's an indicator that, 6 months ago or 3 months ago, we had things flowering, which makes a great buffet for the pollinators year round. Some things that are flowering right now include asters, and goldenrods. We often conduct controlled burns in the spring for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's things haven't yet greened up, so things are dry, and they carry fire a lot easier than if you were to try to in the middle of the summer. When everything's green, you're just going to have a really smoky burn. The second reason is it really preps the landscape for the growing season. It's fascinating to come to an area like this that we burned in the spring and then come back even 2 weeks later and it's just green and lush. And in woodland, sometimes you'll see wildflowers within a couple weeks after a burn. And then the second time that we do burning, when the weather allows, is in the fall. So a day like today would actually be pretty great for burning. You can see the grasses are just they're dry, even though there's still a little bit of green down at the, at the ground level. These dry grasses are going to carry the fire across the landscape pretty well. So this is an area we burned in 2018, and I want to point out how you don't see many leaves on the forest floor because it's an area that we burned all the fuel off of. This is important for an ecosystem because we get a lot more wildflowers after this happens. Also, it's a lot easier if you imagine an acorn falling from an oak tree and hitting bare soil. It's going to germinate a lot easier than if it were to fall on an area where there's a lot of fuel or leaves. Oak leaves make great fuel for fires. They're very crunchy, they dry up easily, and they burn pretty well compared to maple leaves, for example. They kind of act like plates and they stack on top of each other. They hold a lot of water, and so it's a lot easier to burn oak forests like this one than maple-dominated forests. So when we're preparing a site for a burn, if it's in a woodland like this, a couple things we take into consideration is the healthiness of the trees within our burn unit. So here are a couple that caught my eye immediately because at the bottom we see that this one is hollow and then this one is just kind of rotting. You can see that this is a very dead tree. And so a lot of times we'll come in with backpack blowers and we'll remove any fuel, and by fuel I mean leaves and things that are going to carry the fire. We'll remove them away from the base of the trees so that we don't create what are called chimney trees. As you can imagine, if fire gets in there, it can quickly catch the whole tree, which really takes a long time to get out. unfortunately sometimes requires the use of chainsaws, which is something that we're trying to avoid in a controlled burn.
So while we're standing in a prairie area, we can take a look at some of these prairie plants that live here. And a lot of these prairie plants have special adaptations that allow them to survive even when the landscape is burned. And one of those adaptations are deep roots. So a lot of these grasses and a lot of these flowers, which unfortunately you can't see the flowers because it's fall, but a lot of them have roots that go deep down into the ground. And the reason that is because they're able to soak up some of that groundwater and stay hydrated even though the tops of them might be burned. And this is very important for survival. They've adapted with fire, so that's how they can survive. And we talked about the seeds as well. Some of those seeds, when the fire goes through, they sense that and they start to grow, they start germinating. So another really important part of prairie plants and other native plant species is that because of their deep roots and the fact that they're native, they're really good for our rivers and streams. And there's a lot of reasons for that. They have the ability to soak up some of the runoff water that's coming off of either agricultural fields that has all kinds of fertilizers and nutrients on it, or urban areas that can have more nutrients and contaminants from parking lots, cars, things like that. These plants are able to soak some of that up so that it doesn't flow into the river or into our storm drains that go directly into the river. So plants are really good at protecting our water health. And they can also, especially when they're planted along the banks of the river, they hold in the soil. Because of those deep roots, they can hold a lot of that soil in, and that prevents erosion. And erosion can be a bad thing because not only is that limiting what can be on the banks of the river, but it's also putting sediments and more nutrients into the water. And more nutrients in our water leads to algae blooms. And that can get a bit tricky when we have algae blooms. So if you're looking for something you can do to protect our rivers and streams, you can plant native plants like this.
So we've talked a lot about why we burn and how burn is used on a landscape scale. But it's important to talk a little bit also about how you burn. And most importantly, these are controlled burns by trained staff. So it's not something you want to try at home. I and my crew go through weeks of training to get to this point. And then throughout the year, there's a lot of planning that happens as well. So here at River Raisin, it's a list of maybe 13 places we have planned for the spring. And then we look at the forecast a couple days ahead of time and we see this beautiful window where our humidity is going to be a little bit low. We've got, a little bit of wind to push fire through, but not really high wind to create out of control fire. And then we gather up our tools, we gather up our fuel, we gather people. It's important to have a lot of people on a burn to help. And then we contact the fire departments, we make sure we have our permits in place, and we make sure all the neighbors know about it. So there's a lot of planning that goes into it before we actually start to set things on fire. And the fire itself is going to take it's going to be like a full day. Like we're going to be here from at least 10 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m. on a long day, making sure that the site is prepped ahead of time, we set it on fire, and then probably the longest time is making sure it's out. If we don't leave the site until everything is done smoking. All right, and last I want to go through some of the things that we use to make burns successful. First is PPE, or personal protective equipment. And for burns, this is in the form of the clothes that we wear. So I've got this yellow jacket and these green pants. And what makes them special is they're called Nomex, and they are fire resistant. So it's a lot easier to walk through low flames and not get injured. It's important to wear cotton with it though, because other materials can be dangerous for your skin. We have special thick leather gloves that we wear to protect our hands. And then a really important piece is radio and then a radio harness just to carry it in. But this way we can all talk to each other when we're spread out throughout the field. I can say, Katie to Allison, how's the fire over on your line? And we can communicate back and forth to make sure that the fire's staying controlled. And last, but certainly important, is a helmet. Protects your head in case there's any falling trees, falling branches. Now, that tightens on your head, and this little shield that comes down to protect your face as well. So once you're all geared up, ready to go, you've also got a bandana, your water bottle, your fire boots, you start the fire. And an important way to actually spread the fire along a break, or in this case it would be the trail, is we use what's called a drip torch. In here we have a mix of gas and diesel, and so you carry it along and you have a little bit of fire on the ground and you light the tip of the drip torch. And so this curl here prevents the fire from going back into where the fuel is stored, and you can, as the name suggests, drip torch, you just drip fire along the line. Once the fire is started, it's going to spread in the direction that we have the most fuel. So if you imagine this is the line that we want to burn along, it's going to move into the field. That being said, it's going to do a little bit what it wants to. So we have one person putting the fire down and one person making sure it doesn't come into the path and take off to nearby fields. So there's a couple ways to do that. One of them is to use a water pack, like this one. So someone's wearing this like a backpack. They've got their hose, and then they're able to pump water wherever the fire comes out from. So they put out the fire pretty quickly, either with water, if it's just a little bit of fire, you just stomp it right out. And there's one other tool I like to use a lot as well. So this is called a flapper. The name is a little bit confusing because you don't want to flap it. This just creates more oxygen and can make the fire even greater. But what you do, so let's say person A has come through, they've put down the fire, person B with the water pack is up with them, making sure it doesn't go anywhere, and then there's someone with this, and they're just going to come through and smother any fire that's not going where it's supposed to. And just it puts it right out because it removes the oxygen from the equation. Thanks for watching today. I hope you learned a little bit more about controlled burning, its history with the landscape, why we use it, and some of the tools we use for it to be successful.